As we make our way through the Acts of the Apostles, we see in the first part a major focus on Peter, and in the second part of the Acts of the Apostles, we see a focus on Paul. So now we hear about, in our first reading today, Saul sort of coming to the limelight, and literally in his conversion story. And from here on out, we're going to hear a lot about Paul. I think what's really interesting about our first reading today is we have a beautiful compare and contrast between the figure of Saul, who will become Paul, and Ananias. And both of them, in different ways, have their own blindness. We hear about Saul, who is persecuting the church, who is blind to what God asks of him, and who becomes blind on the road to Damascus. This physical healing reflects his own interior spiritual healing, or blindness that's already there. So he's blind spiritually to what God is doing, and now he becomes physically blind. It's sort of an outward expression of what's going on with him interiorly. Then we hear about Ananias, who is asked by God to go visit Saul. And Ananias says, him? You want me to go to him? You know what he's done? Who he is? And what's interesting is Saul's blindness shows also Ananias' own blindness, his prejudice towards Saul, his own prejudice that he brings to the situation. And what's beautiful is in their own being vulnerable, in Ananias going to Saul, and because they are both keeping their eyes fixed on Christ and what Christ is doing in each of them, they are healed. Both of them are healed. I think this is a beautiful story because it reminds us that as we preach the good news, none of us is perfect. All of us come to preaching the good news with our own prejudices, our own shortcomings, but that doesn't stop what God can do in us. But what's also beautiful about this story is I think it's so timely for the world in which we live. Because in the national conversation about race, I think one of the things that's missing is we have to acknowledge that we're all coming into the situation with our own blindness, our own prejudices. But what's missing is we have to keep our eyes focused on Christ, because only looking at Christ can true healing come about. Only when we're able to see our blinders in the light of Christ turning a blind eye to our sins and our shortcomings can true healing happen. So today, as you go about your day, be on the lookout for your own blinders, those things that get in the way, but also allow Christ to transform them to see as he sees today.